This is the story of Eduard Reményi, the violinist who had a very colourful life, a political violinist, a Hungarian nationalist. Eduard Reményi, or Eduard Reményi, was born in 1828 in Miskolc, then part of the Austrian Empire, and died in 1898 in San Francisco. He was a Hungarian violinist and composer. His exact birth date is disputed and variously given from 1828 to 1830. Henry Roth describes him as a widely travelled romantic virtuoso who once toured with Brahms himself as a piano collaborator. He was actually born Eduard Hoffmann, but started using his name Eduard Reményi by the time of the Hungarian revolutions of 1848. And his entire family followed suit sometime by 1862. Some say that this well-travelled man may have been not just a violinist but also a spy in his attempts to advance Hungarian nationalistic causes. Reményi studied under Joseph Böhm at the Vienna Conservatory from 1842 to 1845. It's worth noting that Joseph Böhm was also the teacher of Joseph Joachim, and we'll come back to that topic a little later in the video. He was banished from Austria for participation in the Hungarian Revolution of 1848, and then went to Germany, where he befriended the 15-year-old Johannes Brahms and introduced him to Hungarian music. Reményi studied music in Eger and Vienna. While still a teenager, he enlisted as a soldier and served as an aide-de-camp to Hungarian Commander-in-Chief Görgey during the 1848-49 uprising against Austria. So this gives us a background to the banishment he would later receive. It seems that Reményi was close to Görgey and well known among the Hungarian forces, not for wielding a sword, but for wielding a bow. He was present at most of the important battles, but was not allowed to be a combatant because, as camp violinist, he was said to be of such strategic importance to the morale of the troops that his life could not be risked. So critical was his role that the monarchy issued an edict forbidding him to play. Special efforts were made to capture him, and he was forced to flee Hungary. His pride in his military service was evident. A few years later, a music critic who met him while he was on tour in America described him as being dressed in regimentals, scarlet coat, white vest, and grey pantaloons. On his breast was a large medallion with the likeness of his illustrious countryman Kossuth. The rebellion succeeded for some months, but was eventually crushed when the Austrian Kaiser joined forces with the Russian Tsar. And so, banished from Austria, he fled to Germany around 1849. Then he was pursued by the German authorities, so he fled to the United States. Expelled from Hamburg, the Hungarian exiles departed as a group in December 1849. Arriving penniless at Leith, Scotland, where the local citizens took up donations to send them on their way to America. They arrived in New York just before Christmas, armed with letters of introduction to President Zachary Taylor and intending to found a Hungarian colony in the United States. Eduard and his brother Antal travelled separately from the group, arriving in Boston aboard the ship Cambria on December 31st. Once in America, Eduard resumed his fundraising concerts on behalf of the exiles. Reményi's American debut took place 3 weeks later, on January the 19th, 1850, at Niblo's Gardens in New York City, which was probably a glorified saloon. He was accompanied by an efficient orchestra and performed unnamed concertos by Vieuxtemps and Molique, La Sonnambula Fantasy by De Berrio, and his own Hungarian melodies. How could an unknown 19 or 20-year-old violinist, arriving as a refugee in Boston a mere 3 weeks earlier, arrange and finance such an event? Clearly, the celebrity of the Hungarian refugees helped to fill the hall, but Reményi must also have been the beneficiary of considerable financial and logistical aid from an organised group of local supporters. It seems likely also that the lion's share of the receipts from the concert went to support his compatriots in their exile. Reményi returned to Europe in 1852 and toured with Brahms in 1853. He then sojourned for a time at Weimar, where he received the benefit of Franz Liszt's instruction and friendship. In 1854, he actually became solo violinist to Britain's Queen Victoria. Then in 1860, he was given amnesty and able to return to Hungary, being soon afterward appointed soloist to Emperor Franz Joseph. That was quite a reversal of fortunes for him in his native land. He then retired for some years. Reményi and Joseph Joachim had both been at the Conservatoire in Vienna, although Joachim left just before Reményi started there. There could have been some time in common there. But it was Reményi who introduced Joachim to Brahms, and he also infused into Brahms a love for Hungarian music, which, to quote, Brahms continued to slip quite happily into the style hongrois for the remainder of his life. In 1865, Reményi made a brilliant tour through France, Germany, Belgium and Holland. From 1871 to 1877 he was in Paris, and then 2 years later he proceeded to London, then back to the United States, where he took up residence, Canada and Mexico. A concert tour around the world was undertaken by him in 1886, in the course of which he visited Japan, China and South Africa. In 1872 he married Gisela de Farge, daughter of the famous Hungarian musician Anton Farge. On the occasion of their wedding, Liszt composed a march and began writing a concerto for Reményi. The couple had twin children named Adrienne and Tibor. During his numerous tours of Europe and his world tour, he was awarded many distinctions in recognition of his virtuoso performances. In 1878, he took up permanent residence in the US and died during a concert he was giving in San Francisco in 1898, aged 70. Interestingly, the same thing happened to my violin teacher, who actually collapsed of a heart attack on stage, tragically, and died whilst he was doing what he loved best, playing the violin. Reményi made numerous transcriptions of piano pieces such as Chopin's waltzes, polonaises, and mazurkas, and pieces by Bach, Schubert and others, all of which were published under the title of Nouvelle École du Violon. Among his original compositions is a violin concerto. It is said that the Hungarian nationalist movement was greatly inspired by the American Revolution, and that people in Hungary were huge admirers of George Washington. This kind of makes sense now why I came across this monument of George Washington when I was in Budapest recently. A note on Reményi's Jewishness. According to one report, he was the son of John and Rosalie Hoffman, but in those days his parents' names most likely were Johanan and Rosa. Although both his father and mother were Jewish, for purposes of professional advancement and to please his non-Jewish wife, Reményi was not a practicing Jew. However, in his own way he was respectful of his heritage, and once described himself as a kosher Abbey. Apparently he once said that no man can run away from his blood or his true creed, and he said that the cruel suffering of the Jews is piteously told in their music, and I am carried back to my mother's knees when I hear it. In conclusion, Eduard Reményi was one of the 19th century's most famous violin virtuosos, a master of masters, who was so technically proficient that he was pronounced the Liszt of the fiddle. Indeed, Liszt himself proclaimed Reményi to be the sole surviving possessor of the esoteric spirit of gypsy music. His heart is with the Hungarian melodies which he plays with deep feeling. Reményi introduced the young Johannes Brahms to the music of gypsies and is credited with having inspired the composer's dynamic work, Hungarian dances. So that was the story of Eduard Reményi, or Eduard Reményi, political violinist, Hungarian nationalist, widely travelled romantic virtuoso who once toured with Brahms on piano, romantic player of the 19th century.